Well, hello, everyone. My name is Shalyn McCoy. I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation for Conservation of Atlantic Salmon. And I just want to officially say welcome to today's webinar. The series is made possible in part thanks to the Government of Canada. In today's webinar, we got two individuals here, Olivia Goodbrand and Catherine Dalby from DFO. And I'm just going to give them a little introduction and their topic for today, and then I'll pass it over to them to do their presentation. So Olivia Goodbrand is currently acting manager of DFO's socioeconomic policy team. She leads the development of the Wild Atlantic Salmon Conservation Strategy and is also Canada's domestic advisor to the North Atlantic Salmon Conservation Organization, mostly named NASCO. Olivia recently represented Canada on the development of NASCO's revised stocking guidelines and has partnered with Dalhousie University on the work being presented here today. And she also has with her Catherine Dalby, which is a junior policy analyst on the socioeconomic policy team. She started last summer as an intern and has been working with Olivia on this collaborative project. Catherine is currently completing her Master of Resource and Environmental Management at Dalhousie University and is working as a graduate researcher with Dr. Hannah Harrison in the Marine Affairs program to conduct qualitative research on the use of hatchery and stocking activities for Atlantic salmon conservation in the maritime provinces. She'll be graduating and expects to publish her work this spring. That's good. Today, they're going to be speaking on the socioeconomics of hatcheries and stocking activities for Atlantic salmon. After the presentation today, of course, we'll allow some time for the questions and answers, and I'll explain at that point how we're going to do that. And also, before I forget, in the chat, if you do want to have access to simultaneous translation, we do have an app now called Interprify, and all the instructions on how to log into that is in the chat. So please feel free to use that. So with no further ado, I will pass it over to Olivia and Catherine, and here you go.
Hi, everybody. Charlene, you can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, let's get started then. I'm just going to adjust my screen a little bit here. So I'm going to jump right in. We're going to be talking about stocking today, and I'll be following NASCO's definition of stocking, which is the deliberate release of Atlantic salmon into the wild at any stage of its life cycle for any purpose. So that means whether you're doing a live gene banking program or simply a fish friends program, we're talking about stocking in either case. Here in Atlantic Canada, stocking has been well documented since the 1800s and was probably taking place before then. Since that time, however, hatcheries and their use have changed over time. We know that the number of hatcheries have declined in Atlantic Canada, in part, or largely in part, that's due to the divestiture of federal hatcheries. We know, of course, that there is increasing recognition for the risks that stocking can pose to wild salmon, both from a biological, ecological, and genetic perspective. We've seen a general shift in our preference for management measures towards those which tend to be more focused on habitat restoration. And we've also seen broader shifts in people's attitudes towards the values of nature and what we should and shouldn't be doing to interact with nature. So because of those things, stocking has really become a source of social conflict. And that conflict is really about a group of people who have a shared interest in salmon conservation, but who disagree about the role and appropriate use of stocking. I work for a policy shop, and so I believe that policy guidance can provide clarity in the context of any social debate if that policy guidance is developed collaboratively and considers a variety of perspectives. When we're talking about stocking, first and foremost, we need to understand and acknowledge and mitigate the risks through science. But there's all these other perspectives as well, including socioeconomic, sociocultural dimensions, and of course the perspectives of Indigenous peoples. Our work is starting to begin to look into those dimensions, and we're also trying to capitalize on a little bit of momentum. Charlene mentioned in my introduction that NASCO is currently revising its international guidelines for the stocking of Atlantic salmon, and I did have a chance to participate in that working group as Canada's rep. Those guidelines will be presented at the 2024 annual meeting in June, and once they're accepted by Council, they will be published. I also lead the development of the Wild Atlantic Salmon Conservation Strategy, which provides not only an opportunity, but an expectation that we will deliver stocking policy guidance Anybody who's been following along in kind of the happenings of the salmon world knows that the department has promised a stocking policy in many places. And I actually have a favorite reference dating back to the 1950s in which we say, well, we'll develop stocking guidance. So it's been promised several times, and the timing might be right. There's also a really great international effort right now coming out of the International Year of Salmon, which closed last year, but there's a group called Hatching Plans, which is doing a large-scale literature review. And of interest to some of you is that on the Pacific coast, there's currently work underway to develop a policy framework for Pacific salmon enhancement. So they use different terminology than us, but for all the enhancement that goes on the West Coast, they're also lacking policy guidance. So I'm following along with all those things. Before we can jump into developing policy guidance, though, we need to get a handle on what's happening on the ground. There's a lot of basic questions: who, what, where, why, when, that have yet to be answered. And so the results that I'm going to be presenting to you today are really our first attempt to start filling those knowledge gaps, including questions like how many facilities, how many programs, how many rivers are being stocked. While any DFO and the provinces have a good handle on what may be happening in any one province, we didn't have a good roll-up of what was happening across Atlantic Canada. So we undertook a collaborative work, and we're following along a two-pronged approach. So you'll hear from me today as part of the socioeconomic policy team. And the work led under this group was really intended to understand the socioeconomic and operational dimensions of Atlantic salmon hatchery facilities and programs across Atlantic Canada and Quebec. So we worked with a bunch of organizations and departments, which I'll talk more about in a minute. We developed a questionnaire, and basically we've done a census and an analysis of the basics of who, what, where, why, and when. DFO is not the best positioned organization to lead this other prong of work. We've partnered with Dalhousie University to begin understanding the more human dimensions. So Catherine will be presenting the results of her master's thesis that use a variety of qualitative research methods and approaches to start answering questions around more the sociocultural dimensions of hatcheries. So you'll hear from both of us today. I'm really proud about kind of how we started with this work and all the people that we work with. So on the left-hand side, you see key collaborators. These organizations and departments all went in together on a SSHRC, Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada grant, which was led by Dr. Hannah Harrison. So in addition to those key collaborators and the support that was granted through SSHRC, we also worked really closely with everybody on the right-hand side of the screen. So all the provinces were involved. And every single hatchery manager has been involved, in addition to our introductions and transfers committee chairs and a variety of other communities, organizations, individuals, and departments. So thanks to everybody who's played along here when you're dealing in a socially charged topic like stocking. It really matters that people took the leap and chose to undertake this work with us. So thanks go to them. So I'm going to present to you now the results of the DFO-led aspects of this work, which again are specific to the socioeconomic and operational dimensions of hatcheries. Then I'll pass the mic over to Catherine, who will talk about her social sciences and humanities work. Oh, and while we did have over 60 questions on our survey, I'm not going to present to you 60 results. I'm going to give you the tips of the iceberg here, starting with here's our facilities. We now know for sure that there are 11 facilities currently rearing Atlantic salmon for stocking purposes. There's a variety of ownership models, 3 provincial, 2 federal, 2 private, 2 academic, 1 Indigenous community-led, and 1 combined ownership, which is the Fundy Salmon Recovery Program down in Grand Manan. There they all are on the map. I'm really proud to say that we had participation by all 9 maritime facilities. What is that popping up there? In addition to those maritime facilities, there are 2 in Quebec The province of Quebec did not go through our survey with us, but they did provide some basic information that we were able to use throughout our analysis and report, and confirming, just for your interest, that there are no facilities currently operating in Newfoundland and Labrador, which I'll admit was a bit of a surprise to me because the Exploits River Enhancement Program is a fairly well-known case study, but there are no facilities currently rearing salmon for stocking purposes there. In terms of the economic snapshot, the average annual operating budget for hatcheries is about $400,000, with the cost of labor being the greatest expense. Most of the funding comes through federal and provincial sources, and in our report we do provide a bit more resolution on that fact and how it breaks down. It's a bit of a truism given that there are multiple federal and provincially owned hatcheries. Of importance is that the facilities do rely and provide in-kind support. There's no hatchery out there that's operating as an island. They're very interconnected to the communities in which they serve and a variety of other organizations and departments. And finally, most facilities are located in small population centers, meaning that the jobs they create are important for local and rural communities. In terms of the employment opportunities they create, there are approximately 90 individuals employed within the sector, fairly equal distribution in the gender of those employees. Interestingly, it's a fairly young sector with 55% of employees under the age of 34, and most of those employees have a post-secondary education. So these are educated people, good jobs, and again, in rural locations. In terms of the programs that are currently underway for Atlantic salmon stocking, we identified 16 distinct programs with 5 out of 9 facilities operating 2 or more programs. In total, those programs result in stocking of approximately 28 rivers. There are a few programs that intentionally rotate the location of the areas that are stocked, so I just wanted to note that. Of particular interest to me in the policy world is that we were able to identify 7 distinct stocking objectives for Atlantic salmon across Atlantic Canada, and here they are. Keeping in mind that any one facility might have multiple programs and a program might have multiple objectives, here are the objectives that we identified in order of frequency. So most programs cited population recovery as being one of their primary objectives. Secondly, the maintenance of genetic diversity, the enhancement of recreational fisheries, mitigation of incidental mortalities from catch and release, mitigation of specific industrial pressures, so like macadamia, for example, public education and outreach, and the maintenance of cultural significance and connection of Atlantic salmon to the Mi'kmaq people. So those are all the reasons that stocking is currently happening for Atlantic salmon in Atlantic Canada. It's more interesting. Also of interest, again, coming back to the idea of connectedness within the community, is that 90% of facilities report that they do conduct outreach and education activities within the communities that they serve. Although most facilities are doing outreach and education, only 2 had specific budgets allocated for those activities. 75% of programs report volunteer participating in one or multiple, if not all, stages of production. And we saw volunteer recruitment from a variety of sources, most importantly, post-secondary institutions, Indigenous communities, and local communities. And I think that's where I pass the mic over to Catherine, who's going to delve a little bit deeper into the social connections and human dimensions of stocking and hatcheries. So, Catherine.
Thank you, Livia. Okay, so as Livia mentioned, I will be discussing the preliminary results of the second approach to this collaborative project through Dalhousie University's Marine Affairs program. Excuse me. I have been working as a graduate researcher with Dr. Hannah Harrison for the past year to conduct a qualitative study on the social and human dimensions as part of a larger project within the Maritime provinces, as previously mentioned. My graduate project and the information that I'm presenting today is a social network analysis, which I will describe soon, of hatchery and stocking activities for Atlantic salmon conservation in Nova Scotia. Next slide, please. Okay, So just to provide an overview of hatchery and stocking activities in Nova Scotia, the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture conducts hatchery and stocking activities. In the 1980s, their hatchery stocking program began to essentially maintain recreational angling opportunities. A division of this is the Atlantic Salmon Enhancement Program, which has the stated objective of compensating for losses from catch and release mortalities. It's currently conducted at the Margaree Fish Hatchery and the Fraser's Mills Fish Hatchery. The hatchery stocking program also supports community programming such as stocking for fishing derbies and the Fish Friends program, which has been adapted in some communities for Atlantic salmon. Next slide, please. So to address the knowledge gaps previously described by Livia, the purpose of my project was to evaluate the social and human dimensions, so values, perspectives, and experiences of individuals, groups, and organizations, so the key actors, in hatchery and stocking activities for Atlantic salmon conservation in Nova Scotia. To do so, the objectives were to identify key actors and characterize their connections to build a network structure for both case study areas, understand how the social networks are connected to hatchery and stocking activities, and identify key considerations for management of hatchery and stocking activities for Atlantic salmon conservation. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this portion of the study, 20 semi-structured interviews were conducted from June to September 2023 by myself and Dr. Hannah Harrison across 2 case studies, including the Margaree Fish Hatchery in Inverness County on Cape and Island, Namagi. You can click, it'll point out where it is. Thank you. And the Fraser's Mills Fish Hatchery in Antigonish County. Awesome, thanks. Study participants included those that participate in hatchery and stocking activities. So that might include anglers, habitat restoration groups, volunteers, provincial staff, and as well as those that are critical of the use of these tools. They were either selected using a key informant technique where we would do some background research and find the best representative of these groups to speak with first, or solicited using a snowballing technique. So at the end of each interview, we would ask, who else should we talk to? And they were recruited that way. Participant observation also took place to gain a better understanding of the function of these activities, the facility operations, or other Atlantic salmon related activities, including an Indigenous-led salmon ceremony. And using this data, I conducted 2 types of analysis: thematic analysis, just to look at any themes that were showing up across the case studies and in between interviews, and social network analysis, which I have chosen to focus on for my graduate project. Next slide, please. Okay, there's lots of clicking in this one, so I'm just going to let you know that before I get started. Okay, cool. So social network analysis is a qualitative method that analyzes interactions between actors, so individuals, groups, or organizations, and their connections to understand a system level structure, a network. So for social network analysis, I used a descriptive approach. So if it was described to us by interviewees, we would take that as evidence that these connections or participation in activities were occurring. And using that, we built the network structure by identifying the key actors. That could be actor A or actor B, determining if they have a connection, then characterizing their connection type. You can click. And then one more time. Thank you. So that could be hatchery and or stocking activity. We also looked at directionality. You can click. So that is used to indicate the flow of information or resources or mutual connections. So it might look like this. You can click. Or this. Awesome, thank you. And then putting all of those together, you could get diagrams like this. Great, thank you. Next slide. So as described in the previous slide, the connections were characterized into 4 types. Knowledge and information sharing, which accounted for majority of the connections. That might include things like research and data sharing. Hatchery and stocking activities, which might include food stock collection or feeding. Salmon ceremony or release, which includes conducting or contributing resources to events like an Indigenous-led salmon ceremony or fishing derbies. And lastly, physical resource or equipment sharing, such as the sharing of electrofishing equipment. By identifying key actors, characterizing their connections and the directionality, I was able to build a network structure connecting the two case study areas. Next slide, please. And this is what came out of that. So as described, just to describe what's going on in this network. Key actors are represented by color in the rectangular bubbles and the hatcheries in circles, just to indicate that they are the case study areas. Connections are represented by lines of different dash types and colors. Arrows represent directionality of the connection type. And just to provide a closer look at the network and what it can reveal, I'll provide a subnetwork example in the next slide. It's important to note in this network that the inclusion of groups does not indicate their participation within this study, as we were using a descriptive approach. Moreover, the connection between groups has not been weighted. So, for example, we didn't count the frequency of interactions in these connections. And the placement of groups does not represent a hierarchical structure. From the larger network, there are a few key things that we learned. So hatcheries are part of rich, complex networks built on connections between key actors. As I mentioned earlier, knowledge and information sharing was the most common connection type and appears to be facilitated by both hatchery and non-hatchery related work. Directionality of most of these connections were mutual, where hatchery and stocking activities in some cases were heavily supported by community groups. And hatchery and stocking activities can also support subnetworks, which I will explain in the next slide. Great, thank you. So from the larger network, this is an example of a subnetwork for the Fish Friends program in the Fraser's Mills fish hatchery case study. For this program, the hatchery provides salmon or trout eggs to community groups for placement in elementary school classrooms where students can raise and release them. Community groups like the Pictou County Rivers Association, who works with approximately 16 schools in their community, can provide educational programming and materials to classrooms, training for instructors, or equipment such as tanks to the schools. Community groups can also work together to develop educational material and resources for the program, like the collaboration between the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq and the North Colchester River Restoration Association, where they're currently working to indigenize the curriculum being used. Overall, the program is a function of the provincial hatcheries and ultimately links together settler, NGO, provincial, and Indigenous groups that may otherwise be on opposite sides of the debate for the use of hatcheries and stocking, but it also connects groups which may not directly participate at these hatcheries. Next slide, please. So between these two approaches, there are some shared take-home messages. First, partnerships and collaboration. Hatchery and stocking activities are supported by connections between groups in rich, complex networks within local communities. Second, current processes are not meeting the needs and requirements of participants currently conducting hatchery and stocking activities, so enhancement of information and data sharing is needed. And lastly, policy guidance can provide structure in decision-making processes and practices used for hatchery and stocking activities. And that concludes the presentation. Oh.
Okay, Charlene, you're gonna have to help me out here.
Okay. So we're good. Are you ready for question and answers, or was there more slides?
No, that's our presentation.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. That was an excellent presentation. I know there's a lot of interest on this subject matter, so I will open that up to some question and answers. For those that have attended to my webinars before, you can do it by typing it in, and I'll read it out loud, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can ask your own question. So we're ready anytime, so I'll just check here.
And we can't see anybody else, right, Charlene? That's
exactly. But you'll be able to hear them if they have their hand up here. Okay, we have a question from Kevin Shepard. Kevin?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I represent the Environment and Resource Management Association on the Exploits River watershed in Grand Falls, Windsor. And first of all, I must say it's extremely disappointing when I see the mapping of Atlantic Canada and I see that there's no facilities in Newfoundland and Labrador when we are by far the largest producer of wild Atlantic salmon and are very many successful stories on our river systems, including our one on the Exploits River in this area. And it's funny that you should, in your 7 distinct objectives, every one of these applied, every single one applied to our facility here in the Exploits when we operated it back in the 90s. And due to cancellation of DFO funding, we of course eventually shut down that hatchery, and it is no longer operating. We still have a fabulous run of Atlantic salmon on our river. Last year, we had over 30,000 fish come through our fishway systems, albeit some areas of the province were not as successful as others. From a restocking and hatchery perspective, it's something that we are very keenly interested in because in the past, we've had so much success with it. We had obstructions on our river systems where we've done a lot of work to remove structures. We've done a lot of restoration work, and we continue to do that. We also have our Fish Friends program, which you alluded to in your comments there. And we have 11 schools this year with our Fish Friends program, and we use our stock that we can get from our fishways in order to hatch or to incubate those and facilitate the school system. But you know, it's gratifying to see that there is some hatchery talk again, which for years was a dirty word in Atlantic salmon life, and I'm very disappointed with that because we have seen so much success, and you know, and I wish you folks well in what you're doing. We're waiting now for the strategy to be announced, and I hope that strategy includes some funding and that for hatcheries and restocking facilities to be available in the area. I really don't have a question. I just want to make my comments known that we're knowledgeable. We've done so much work in the Exploits watershed through the years and continue to do that. And you know, the expertise that we have at our facility here is second to none in Atlantic Canada. And everything you talked about, we're very, very familiar with. And I would love to see, as part of the strategy moving forward, that we look at doing some restocking and reintroduction of fish via the hatchery program as we move forward. And I asked the same question to a federal minister some time ago, and the word that I got back was, you know, somewhere between having hatcheries on every river and no hatcheries, we need to find a happy medium. So I'd like for you to comment on that, if you would, and because it's something I want to see moving forward as we try to improve the state of the Atlantic salmon, because if not, the stock will be totally decimated. Thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you well.
No, thanks to hear from you, Kevin. We should follow up. I don't know how you want to get in touch with me. Maybe you've probably got Charlene's contact information, and I'm easy to find.
Well, I can get it from Charlene or somebody. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about what we've done in the past here and what we can do in the future. I'm a board member with IRMA. I recently served as an interim executive director, and I moved on from that now. We have a new executive director in place, but certainly I'd love to talk with you about it because we've got a lot of success and a lot of questions and a lot of answers as well. So thanks for the opportunity. I'd love to touch base with you.
I'm the only Olivia Goodbrand at DFO, so I'll be easy to find.
Oh yeah, everybody at DFO knows about us for sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, thank you, and I'll make sure I sent you that contact information, Kevin. We have another hand raised here. We're going to go to Charles Crousset. Go ahead.
Thank you, Shalyn, and congratulations to both of you for your presentation and taking the time to present this to us this afternoon. I have a question or comment in regards to the slide, if I can just bring it back on my screen here. Just one sec. The one that has the 7 distinct objectives that were identified as far as reasons for stocking. The number 4 was a bit of an eye-opener for me. I'm with the Atlantic Salmon Federation, representing the province of Quebec, and we're very lucky where we have virtually very little or none as far as stocking is concerned. Number 4, mitigation of incidental mortalities from catch and release. What kind of numbers are you talking about in regards to incidental mortalities from catch and release? What data would you have to use that as something that stocking can help?
Great. Hi, Charles. I actually remember you from way back in the day. You were the program director from ASF Quebec,
yes,
right?
Been a very short time with us.
Okay, where do I want to dive in here? So we didn't delve into kind of data mining out what the mortalities would be. So that specific objective is relating to the program in Nova Scotia on the Marguerite. So I can't tell you, I can't answer that question for you. It is a stated objective. So the question that went out to all hatchery managers were really to self-identify their stated objectives. So yeah, we don't really have a fine-tuned answer other than that. Is there another way you could ask the question? Like, I'm not sure what to do with your question because I don't have that data. So.
Okay. Well, I was just curious because it's being stated there as one of the reasons, if I'm interpreting this correctly, that there'd be some data to support it somewhere. So that's the idea behind my question.
Right, yeah. So our question going out to the hatchery managers were, what are your objectives? Not, demonstrate to us that your objectives are being met or anything like that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. We have a written question that I'll read out loud, and it's for Catherine. It says that it was indicated that the current hatcheries were not meeting the needs of the participants. What are these needs, and how would your solution of augmenting information and data sharing fix this?
Yeah, so from the questionnaire results, we asked what key challenges and limitations there were for each stage of the program. It was stated quite often that permitting processes were an issue in terms of what was needed to be done for each activity, such as timing of broodstock collection. It wasn't reflective of what was actually happening in the environment. For example, what was on the permit wasn't lining up with when the fish actually showed up, things like that. Data and information sharing as well might have included the sharing of scale samples with DFO science, but not really getting any feedback from how these samples were being used or if it was for population monitoring or anything like that. So to, I guess, help enhance data and information sharing would help communication between what actually is being done in the field versus what is being permitted. That answers your.
Thanks, Catherine. Another written question. There's many questions in that one question, so I'll.
Okay.
Was there any information whether any of the hatcheries, regardless of the program goals, set any performance evaluation metrics, such as like percentage of survival to fishery returning? If not, how does one evaluate the impacts or benefits to Atlantic salmon? Secondly, if hatcheries are educating the public about the need for hatcheries, is this not confirmation bias around continuing the program, especially in not nested, just lost it here, nested in a monitoring evaluation performance framework to demonstrate goals that are met? It's a long question. So I think there's an example here with a number of fish stock not being a performance metric of value, etc. I can read part of it again if you need me to.
Okay, Olivia, do you want to speak to this one?
Yeah, so I think the first question was really about performance measures. So for hatcheries, are they measuring success? My answer there would be that success can only be measured against a specific objective, right? So not everybody stated a specific objective of, creating a self-sustaining run or population recovery. So success can only be measured against a specific outcome. So I would start by saying that. I would say that I believe, Catherine, that all or most facilities did report population monitoring activities being conducted adjacent to or in parallel with their hatchery programs. However, I don't recall that there were any, we're clearly talking to a scientist here. We're not running a Pacific style mark, release, recapture type program at any of these hatcheries. So there was population monitoring, but would not be able to attribute success in the way that I think our question is being asked. The next kind of grouping of questions was around the education and outreach component. And I think what was stated was, well, are they just educating the public on the benefits of hatcheries? And no, that's really not the impression that we came out of this project with. The salmon hatchery outreach and education programming was really, that we saw, was centered around salmon conservation, the habitat requirements of salmon, the importance of salmon, the values of salmon. I don't recall any instances of hatcheries championing the use of hatcheries. It was more a vehicle for talking about and stewarding this species. Catherine, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you summarized that nicely.
Okay. I don't know, Charlene, you can check that answer against what was written. I don't see the question, so it's hard for me to.
I know for sure, and no, you did good. So I got two questions with hand raised. We'll go to Maxime Gerard, and then we'll go to Tommy Linsari after. So Maxime, you can go next.
Yes. Hi, thank you for your good presentation. And my question, sorry if it's been said earlier, I missed a part of it, and sorry for my English. I want to talk about. I want to hear you talk about the DFO stocking strategy. And as it's been said earlier, I think you're working on something about the stocking, and I was wondering if you have a perspective of where is it now, and if you have a time when it will be announced, and if you're still working on this. Thank you.
Hi. Your English is great. It's better than my French. Okay, there's two things that DFO is working on right now. The first is the Wild Atlantic Salmon Conservation Strategy. So I think that's where you're picking up on the word strategy. We are hoping to publish that strategy in late spring of this year. And I expect what you'll see in that strategy is a commitment to develop stocking policy guidance. And I think that's what you're really interested in, is will we develop a stocking policy? So the commitment will be made through the conservation strategy to get there. And the work that we're doing now is really positioning us to start that work. We needed to get a baseline understanding of what was happening on the ground, what the facilities were out there, why stocking is being done, kind of taking a look at those basic who, what, where, why, when type questions. Catherine's work through Dalhousie has given us another really interesting perspective to consider as well. So I wouldn't expect us to start developing a stocking policy tomorrow. But I am really hoping we can capitalize on all the work that is happening now, which means I hope we start soon. When we do get into the development of a stocking policy or policy guidance, it will necessarily involve many discussions and consultations and collaborations with people on the ground. So you will hear about it. I'll make sure that happens, Maxime, because there's so much to say. I mean, already in the short questions or a few minutes we've had for questions, we've clearly seen both sides of the debate, right? And there's also a large voice for the middle ground. So I do hope that work starts soon, and there's a lot of good reasons to start it soon.
Okay, thank you. I forgot to tell you, I'm working for the government of Quebec, and my name is Maxime Guérard. So, if I heard well what you said, it's that it's going to be partly addressed in the Wild Atlantic Salmon Conservation Policy,
Yeah.
but not totally.
And I don't think that we've met before. We reached out to Julienne Avril, that's been our contact with the province, but happy to expand our conversation, and I can follow up with you and eventually when we get a report, flip you a copy as well. So.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Maxime. Tommy, you had a question?
Hi, thank you. I do. First, I would like to commend DFO for taking this task that's clearly been on the table since 1950s, I think Olivia said, finally seriously and looking and developing policy and continuing to that we better understand this from ocean to ocean to ocean, what this tool can and cannot do. So that's great. I'm genuinely happy that Ottawa has taken this file and put staff and resources on it. So thank you. I would like to ask if you are able to elaborate a little bit more on, you had those 7 bullets for the objectives of stocking. One of them was, and I don't remember the word that you used, I think it might have been bullet number 4, but for the lack of better term, sort of the mandatory compensation type of stocking, whereas some industry has been developed and it has somehow been agreed shall be some type of a compensation, which is then in the form of stocking. Of course, I live in Fredericton. I'm rather familiar with, for example, the Mactaquac hydropower generation type of compensation. But how common is that across an Atlantic? Is Mactaquac the only one who is on the hook? And so that is kind of the first part of the question. But before I let you go, I also have a recommendation in your work when you finalize this evaluation to not forget in the total value of these potential missed compensation agreements that, so I'm for example, right now, I'm looking at the original memorandum of agreement signed 30th of May in 1968 by the Fish behalf of Majesty the Queen, where it was agreed that by building Mactaquac, it was agreed that there will be some kind of a loss for Atlantic salmon, and it was agreed that there shall be a compensation of 500,000 Atlantic salmon smolts annually put in the river. And then we talked earlier, or you talked earlier about this, not necessarily that stocking, ways of doing stocking didn't always not necessarily meet the need of the client. And I guess in the case of Mactaquac, this was perhaps the case where it was just over time, it was just dropped off. It was like, okay, well, we will discontinue doing that. But interestingly, it wasn't replaced necessarily by anything. So there's a letter signed by a minister that we shall compensate, but then it was like, nah, we're not going to do that anymore. So it's an interesting one that is almost like, well, I don't want to call it missed opportunity, but it's a missed or abandoned commitment, and there's a value of money associated to that commitment that shouldn't be forgotten in your. It's not happening anymore, but it should carry a dollar value. So how common are these mandatory compensation? In Europe, of course, they are massively common. Not so much, I guess, in Atlantic Canada. So can you elaborate a little bit more on those?
Sure. Catherine, do you want to take question number one? I don't want to take all the airtime here, but.
No, you can go ahead with both.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can jump in any time.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so yeah, there is Mactaquac, of course, as the obvious one in your backyard. There's also a hatchery in Quebec that does mitigation stocking. I think you're also familiar with the case study of the Charlot hatchery, which was set up or established to do mitigation, but is not necessarily fulfilling that particular objective anymore. So it's not super common in Atlantic Canada. You've got a copy of the MOA, Tommy, from 1968. I think you probably also know that that MOA is being renegotiated now. And I think it's commonly understood that that 68 deal was a bad deal for salmon, for the government, for people, for salmon people, certainly. And so I think everybody is hopeful that we'll get a better outcome there. I knew the question of compensation at Mactaquac would come up. Thought it would come up from John Bagnall. I'm sure he's on the line somewhere. And I don't know what you want me to say, Tommy. You're as familiar and aware as the situation.
No, you answered. Like I wasn't aware like how common this is. You okay. Cited there's 3 examples, so that answers the question. The rest of mine was just a comment that you don't forget that kind of assessment, and clearly you're not. So thank you.
I won't forget.
Thanks, Tommy. I will read the next one. So there's an understanding that genetics effects are one of the main reasons for hesitancy when it comes to stocking, specifically with fish raised in captivity in various levels, meaning fry, par, etc. What would DFO like to see for studies to vet the various stocking methods as far as seeing which ones may be more or less risky to genetics, if at all? Are there any specific efforts in this area?
I've got a good answer for that one. So right now, the way that we've been operating is that when there is a new large-scale stocking program proposed to the department, we use the FCAS program, the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat, to run through and assess the risks. That's the way things have been done for large programs. The model that we're moving towards is that the department would like to and has started initiating sort of one larger scale FCAS process to understand the risks, genetic, demographic, ecological, that stocking poses writ large for Atlantic salmon, and proposing mitigations to those. So that's a process that was started. It is being led out of the Gulf region, but it is leaning into the expertise and experience of DFO science in all implicated regions across Atlantic Canada. And I know that the beginning stages for them is a large-scale literature review. So that's the piece that we'd be waiting on from science. You know, and in order to deliver good, sound policy advice, we would need to have that that piece of the puzzle in place. So I'm really looking forward to that work. And yeah, I think that answers the question.
Thank you. You might have already answered this one, but there's so much support for stocking on the West Coast. Why is hatchery support on the East Coast drastically less? Why is there such a hang up in comparison?
It's a huge question. So I have been following along with the Pacific's enhancement stocking or enhancement policy. So it really is a different beast. They don't use the word stocking, they use the word enhancement. They have over 200 hatcheries. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of employees working into that program, and multiple types of hatcheries, ranging from DFO-led to third-party-led to sort of community-based, co-led. It's a big system. It's tied up to all kinds of different legislation that we don't have here. There's commitments that have been made over time between the United States and Canada for output that relate to how many fish we can harvest. So hatchery production for BC really comes down to commercial fisheries. We've lost our commercial fisheries, and the hatcheries weren't really a part of the commercial fisheries in Atlantic Canada, and that probably relates back to patterns of colonization. Like it's a big question and a very cool question because the answer is complicated. When we talk about stocking policy guidance and the direction that we're going, you know, I think we can take off the two extremes from the table. We will never see the scale or scope of enhancement that is done out west come to Atlantic Canada. On the other hand, I don't see policy guidance coming out of this that says thou shalt not stock anywhere ever again. I really like to focus the conversation on the middle ground, which is when and where is it appropriate to use this tool. But you know, Pacific Coast is, some people love that model and some people really condemn it. It provides some useful commentary and things we can learn, but it's not perfectly comparable to what's going on with Atlantic salmon. So whoever asked that question, they want to talk more, you can call me offline. It's a really interesting answer.
And I think you know the person. So so the next question is kind of a follow-up to a previous answer that was given regarding science. So the science shows hatcheries do not benefit wild population. What is the rationale for continuing the use of hatcheries, especially since you just said a while ago they don't actually measure their success?
So, Catherine, do you want to talk about some of the human benefits to start? Are you comfortable doing that?
Yeah. Within my graduate research, like obviously it's not pro hatchery. We understand that hatcheries are not always the best thing to be using, but they do provide, as demonstrated in the literature, like other opportunities for people to participate in conservation that can create social opportunities, such as being connected with other individuals in their community, feeling like they're contributing to something, and even just paying it forward for future generations. That's a key part of the human dimensions that needs to be considered moving forward. I think I've lost my train of thought a little bit. Olivia, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, I think our work signals that hatcheries are important to the communities in which they serve. This is a sector. These are real jobs. These are places that are connected to the communities in which they serve. So it's not, you know, I guess all roads lead back to policy advice for me. And yeah, we take science, the best available science, into consideration. That's the foundation of the work that we do. But you know, I think what our work and what the work of others indicates is that it's a lot more complex than that. And like everything, we need to consider science along with the other values and human dimensions. And that's certainly true of stocking, right? If it was clear as just following the science, I don't think that we would see this huge social conflict. And that's what makes it a really interesting area to be studying and working in.
Okay, thank you. We'll go with one last question here, and I think I touched on all the other ones. And this one's more general. So what are the defined limitations of salmon conservation, and what are the potential strategies that you can suggest?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. What are the defined limitations with salmon's conservation, and what are the potential strategies that you can suggest? So it's more of a general question.
So I think the question is what, like, oh man, this is a big question. So I think the question is, what is limiting salmon conservation?
Define limitations, yeah.
A person might have to jump on the line and talk to us a bit more what they have in mind before I can give a good answer, but I can take, I guess, gosh, what would I say about that? I think part of it is, you know, we've maybe been taking a bit of a scattergun approach to conservation of Atlantic salmon. You can use whatever analogy you like there, death by a million cuts maybe. But one thing that would help, I think, is to get really focused on the things that work. Getting some unity going within the Atlantic salmon community. The community is diverse. There's a lot of different user groups in there, and while they all want the same outcome, which is healthy, vibrant salmon populations, I don't think that there's a lot of consensus on how best to get there. The science can provide some advice, but increasingly, I think the value of salmon lies in the human connections, and cultural connections, spiritual connections that people have. So kind of building up our understanding of those values is important, and tackling the problems that we can mitigate, and trying to learn more about those that we, that still limit salmon are important. But again, it's kind of a huge question. If that person feels brave enough to jump on the line and talk a bit about more what they had in mind, I could probably provide a better answer.
And I think that the strategy that's going to be coming out will answer some of those potentials, right? So that was part of the whole reasoning of the consultation and the report being put together. So that'll cover a lot of that big question for sure. So I think that's wrapping up the questions for today's session, but sometimes, or lots of times, there's always questions after the fact. So if anybody has a question at a later date, please feel free to send them along, and I'll make sure that Lydia and Catherine gets them, and we'll get an answer back to you. So to finish up, I just want to say thank you to both of you. Great job. There was a lot of interest, a lot of questions, and you did wonderful. Really appreciate the time that you took to present today and to share those results with us. Before we leave too, I just want to mention that in March, we were supposed to have a webinar on eDNA from Dr. Ian Bradbury. It was postponed for those that thought they maybe had missed it. It is going to be held on April 17th. So please look out for the reminder. We'll be sending that around to everyone. So once again, just a big thank you. It's going to be recorded. It's going to be on our YouTube page if someone wants to have access to it at a later date. Just thank you for participating. So you have a great afternoon, everybody.
So much, Charlene, and to everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for having us.